coming on the air with the devastation in Turkey and Syria, with that international scramble tonight to try to find survivors trapped by buildings that are completely crushed after those overnight earthquakes that left thousands of people dead. Questions now about where folks are supposed to go in these freezing areas already fighting a humanitarian crisis. We're live with the latest. Plus, with that alleged Chinese spy balloon now in the water, the Navy is trying to pick up the pieces. They are literally looking for pieces of this thing. We'll take you live to South Carolina, where the recovery is happening right now. We're also live in Ohio, where dangerous chemicals are being sent into the air on purpose to try to prevent a huge explosion after a train derailed. What officials want folks nearby to do now. And you're going to hear what a new AI chatbot thinks this show should sound like, and why some teachers are now embracing this AI thing in the classroom. And in tonight's original, with thousands of people still struggling to smell, still struggling with their sense of smell after having COVID, researchers think a new nose could help. We're going to explain this bionic breakthrough later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight we are starting overseas with the scramble to find survivors after those devastating earthquakes, leaving thousands dead in Turkey and Syria. And we want to show you right now the folks in the video that you're looking at coming together with rescue crews in the cold. It is freezing there to try to help find survivors. You are seeing some of these images now. They are pulling kids, children out of the piles. Look at this, of dirt and rocks and concrete. They are reuniting these kids with their families. You're seeing some of that here, but there are still some families waiting tonight, hoping and praying. Listen to one grandmother.
Torunum 1,5 yaşında. Lütfen yardım edin onlara, lütfen. Sabahtan beri ses alamıyoruz, haber alamıyoruz onlardan, lütfen.
It's heartbreaking to hear, to look at, to listen to, and you are seeing some of it, the damage that crews are dealing with. With 3,700 people killed, that number is expected to only go up. Dozens of countries and aid groups are promising to help. The EU and NATO pledging more money, more rescue supplies, more search teams. And President Biden today saying he is deeply saddened by the loss of life. We want to show you where exactly the earthquakes happened early this morning, local time in southeast Turkey and northern Syria. First, there was the 7.8 magnitude earthquake that you had. Some of that shaking could actually be felt as far away as Egypt and Israel. That's like the distance from New York to Chicago. Think about that. A few hours later, there was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake right in the same area. So big earthquake on top of big earthquake, with Turkey's president declaring 7 days of national mourning for what he says is the biggest disaster in this country since 1939. And in Syria, the earthquake slammed an area that has already been devastated by 12 years of civil war. Molly Hunter is covering all of this for us, joining us live now. So first, Molly, just start with what the latest is on the search and rescue push tonight as it heads into, of course, the early morning hours overseas.
Yeah, Hallie, and you said it really clearly in your intro. We are still in search and rescue. There is still a window to find survivors, and the Turkish authorities are saying that. And when they talk to their international partners, as you mentioned, obviously lots of international aid is coming, including in the form of boots on the ground search and rescue teams to help search. That is their focus right now. And they are trying to get to all of the devastated areas. Hallie, one of the biggest challenges, we know what the devastation looks like in areas like Gaziantep. We don't know what all of the devastation looks like in some of the more rural areas. So one of the figures that we've been given from Turkish authorities, 3,000 buildings completely destroyed. That's just where we can see. That is just where authorities have actually been to. And of course, as you mentioned too, the first big quake hit at 4 a.m. That means, Hallie, families are in their beds. Families are asleep. And when they have seconds to get out, what do they grab? They grab their children. They don't have time to grab anything if they are lucky enough to get out. So right now, search and rescue teams on the Turkish border, and as you said, on the other side as well, in Syria, trying to find any survivors right now is the priority.
You know, we've heard some of the international response because this is one of those just horrible, horrible disasters that has captured the attention of people across the country and so many people who want to help, right? And you are seeing that mobilization from, as we said, the EU, NATO, countries around the world, aid organizations, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And the UK, for example, where I am, we know that countries across the EU, even small countries, are sending what resources they can in the form of boots on the ground, as I mentioned, search and rescue teams, search and rescue dogs. They are sending equipment. They are sending experts like engineers to assess buildings' strength and what needs to be done to obviously kind of make even fragile structures more sturdy. We are also seeing the U.S., of course, they've already sent 2 teams of 79 people. And additionally, we are seeing transport aircrafts. One of the biggest challenges, Hallie, is going to be actually getting the search and rescue teams to the places that need it most. And that means also on the Syrian side. So one of the biggest challenges is going to be to get people, and I think we will see lots of international teams show up in Turkey, but then getting them to northwest Syria, the kind of mechanism that usually allows humanitarian aid workers and humanitarian aid goods kind of transporting logistics, getting over that border, Hallie, is time consuming. So I think one of the things we'll be really watching in the next 24 hours is if that is expedited to get the people who really need to be on the Syrian side over there, because there's just not the capacity to start rebuilding or even assessing that area.
It is complicated, to say the least. Molly Hunter, thank you. Thanks for being on top of it for us. Appreciate it. In just the last hour, we are hearing from President Biden on that suspected Chinese spy balloon that we're finding out was the size of like a regional jet. Our Kelly O'Donnell asking the president if it had always been his plan to shoot this thing down or only once it became public. Listen to what the president told her.
Oh, no, it was always my position. Once it came over into the United States from Canada, I told the Defense Department I wanted to shoot it down as soon as it was appropriate.
A State Department spokesperson also saying that the U.S. acted responsibly, practically, and prudently and should not be blamed, with no word yet from spokesperson Ned Price, who you see there, on whether or how the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken's trip, is going to be rescheduled to China. China, for its part, is not backing down from the whole "it was just a weather balloon" thing. That's what China says. They say the U.S. is overreacting. They say we weren't spying, it was a weather balloon. And Beijing says it reserves the right to do further action, basically. As for the balloon itself, this, what you are looking at, is part of what we can see from the search for what's left of it along the coast of South Carolina there. You've got Navy divers looking for pieces, and a National Security Council spokesperson confirms, no, China isn't going to get it back, right? Presumably, the U.S. is going to want to look at this. They're going to want to assess what capabilities did this balloon actually have. It is enormous, as you see that moment of impact that is sort of now infamous everywhere. We knew it was big. Turns out it's more than 2,000 pounds and something like 200 feet tall. George Solis is in Surfside Beach, South Carolina, watching sort of the recovery process for this balloon, George, and a lot of new details today on what it is as we look at the geopolitical drama as well.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. Apart from all of the political fallout, a lot of people are just curious about the size of this thing, right? As you mentioned, that huge size. To put it in comparison, one report noting that this balloon was 4 times as big as last year's Snoopy float from the Macy's Day Parade. Actually, that was current. In another comparison was last year's Rockefeller tree from in the plaza. So again, this is huge when you really think about it. And of course, a lot of people watched this balloon go down here off the Carolina coast. A lot of people were trying to get some images. Today, we are learning that, of course, there are more Navy divers out there investigating this, looking at the bottom of the ocean. Pentagon saying that this balloon actually hit about 42 feet of water. And now, of course, we've been watching that video of what that apparent balloon debris that was rescued. We know intelligence officials want to get a good look at this, and we know that some of this debris is going to be shared amongst different intelligence agencies so they can dissect not only the balloon debris, but any equipment that, of course, might have been on board to really get a sense of what Chinese surveillance capabilities were attached to this balloon, if any at all. And a number of people I spoke with here were just trying to get a glimpse of the recovery of some of these parts, and that is all officials really want people to do, of course. Just look at this thing, but do not mess with it by any stretch of the imagination, Hallie.
Yeah, no kidding. We know that, you know, where you are, this is one of those stories that stretches from where you are in South Carolina to where I am here in Washington. Because as you've laid out, Navy divers are trying to find this thing. Officials are saying, please don't bring it home. If you find a piece of a Chinese spy balloon on the beach, like, don't take it back to your house, which, like, okay, got it. But we're also finding out that now members of Congress are going to end up briefed at some point potentially this week on what's going on with this spy balloon. Same thing for staffers, apparently, based on some of our new reporting. tomorrow, according to a congressional source, tomorrow morning here. This is something, George, that goes well beyond the borders of the state where you are. This is a major issue now that, as we saw from the State Department, they are looking to have to talk about here.
Yeah, that's right. And to that point, one thing that people really should know about any debris that may come on shore, if you mess with this could be impeding with a federal investigation. And look, we know that the Navy is out there right now. They have divers that are in there using robotic equipment. They couldn't actually go out there yesterday because the weather was so bad. So we know they're out there right now. We know that the Navy has at least 2 vessels out there, one already collecting and categorizing equipment. Just how much is unclear at this point. We know there's another vessel out there that is scanning the bottom of the ocean floor for more debris. And again, to get a sense of how much work they have ahead of them, we have some reporting that indicates that this debris field is about 15 football fields wide by 15 football fields wide. That is huge. So of course, in the coming days, we know that there will be more Coast Guard presence out there. We know there are currently 3 cutters there right now providing military aid. The question is, if more of this debris washes up, where will it go, and how soon will U.S. officials be able to respond to it? Hallie.
George, so Lise, live for us there in Surfside Beach. George, thank you. We know, based on the reporting from our White House team, that this whole China spy balloon situation is causing President Biden and his speechwriting team to be thinking about how they handle this at his State of the Union address tomorrow night. But we've also seen the president in that same sort of moment there on the South Lawn talk about what to expect from this speech, which, again, happens every year, but it is an instance where he's in front of a massive audience in prime time on live TV across major networks. Watch what he said.
I want to talk to the American people and let them know the state of affairs, what's going on, what I'm looking forward to working on from this point on, what we've done, and just have a conversation with the American people.
He's prepping for it. You can see it on the right side of your screen. The president, he's just like us. He has cookies while he writes his speeches. That's him at Camp David, prepping with his top advisors there. On the left, you see Capitol fencing going up around the building where the president will be delivering his remarks. It is supposed to be only temporary, and it comes as a new poll out today. It says most Americans, majority, think the union really isn't too strong or strong at all. I want to bring in now Mike Memoli. So, Mem, let's start with the sort of China factor here and the late-breaking reporting into us tonight from you and the White House team on the way that the president and his team will be tweaking around the edges, probably right up until 8:59 tomorrow night.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. We know the president was late coming back to the White House because his prep time at Camp David with aides all weekend long even went into overtime. And so one of the interesting things here is that we are learning that there was already going to be a substantial part of tomorrow night's speech devoted to the U.S.-China relationship. And we've heard President Biden refer to China, refer to his trip to meet with Xi Jinping 12 years ago quite often as sort of a foundational aspect of his presidency. It's defined so much of the way he talks about not just foreign policy, but also domestic policy, the need to regain the economic competitiveness around the world to compete with China. And so what we're learning is that the sort of the last minute debates, one among many, I should add, are about just how to refine that China section to include the current developments. I think the White House is also mindful of the criticism, the heavy criticism they're getting from Republicans about how they've handled this. And so it's an opportunity with the audience that he's going to have tomorrow being as big as he's going to have all year to really try to address that head on. And we're told he's going to do so.
What's interesting is how much of this is going to be not just the policy, right? Things like police reform, as you've laid out foreign policy, but also the politics and the idea of the 2024 backdrop, as this is kind of a preamble to that. This is going to be the president, though, delivering that speech in front of a divided Congress with Republicans in control of the House of Representatives. And there will be Republican responses. We know Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to be delivering the official response. And guess what, ma'am? As you've been on the air, former President Trump, we've found out, will be delivering a kind of rapid response as well. Apparently, according to our team who covers the former president here at NBC News, it's going to be like some sort of video that's going to get released right after President Biden speaks. And that, Mem, says a lot about the politics behind all this.
Absolutely, Hallie. I mean, what I heard from a very senior White House official was that one reason why they delayed the president's announcement about his 2024 intentions until after the State of the Union is because they want him to enter that chamber tomorrow night as the president of the United States and not a candidate for president of the United States. That being said, so much of the foundation, the formation of this speech is really a view towards kicking off his 2024 candidacy. I mentioned the size of the audience tomorrow night. Our colleague Peter Nicholas pointed out that 38 million people watched the State of the Union address last year. It's really 3 times as many people as watched the Philadelphia Phillies lose the World Series in Game 6 last October. And so, you know, he wants to make sure.
So weird. My earpiece went out. I've lost your audio entirely. That's so strange. I think you were saying that it's going to be fewer people that'll watch the Super Bowl and the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday. So we can leave it there, ma'am. I'm good if you are. Thank you.
Well, something like that. But just to point out, it's not just the size of the audience, Hallie. It's really who's watching. The people who are going to be tuned in tomorrow night are not those who are watching this right now, tuned in to the day-to-day developments of Washington. So he really wants to tee it up for the kind of audience that's going to decide the election, not sort of the insider game.
Mike Memoli, it's always, I think, good to see you. Appreciate it. We're going to have a ton of coverage, of course, teeing up to the president's State of the Union speech just before 8 Eastern, right here. However you are streaming, we're going to have it all. Tom Yamas and I, we're going to be here in Washington together with an absolute crushing panel of folks, rock and roll all-stars ahead of this thing. And then, of course, network coverage with Lester and Savannah. And then afterwards, Chuck and Kristen pick up the baton. Do not miss it. So as the president gets ready for that speech, we talked about how he will be in front of a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, and they are investigating, right? That is in full swing right now, including with this so-called weaponization of government hearing set to begin on Thursday. House Republicans say they want to use this to look at what they think is bias against conservatives in the federal government. They say bias against former President Trump in agencies like the Justice Department. A source familiar is telling us about the first few witnesses they'll call. Republican Senators Ron Johnson, Chuck Grassley, former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who's now become a kind of fixture over on Fox News, and a former FBI special agent. Garrett Haake is joining us now. And Garrett, you have the duty of covering both Donald Trump, and we are grateful to you for your reporting on that a moment ago, and also the people who are hoping that if not, Donald Trump takes the Republican nomination, that certainly it is a Republican who takes the White House come 2024. That is what a lot of this effort is about. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I was listening to your conversation with Memoli and the idea that the State of the Union is designed to reach people who don't normally follow the ins and outs of politics. And I think you could think of this committee, the Weaponization Committee, as designed to reach people who do follow the ins and outs of politics, but maybe who don't follow the ins and outs of what conservatives have been talking about largely amongst themselves over the last 2 years. Republicans want to broaden the scope of interest into this idea of the FBI in particular, but the Department of Justice and the federal government more broadly. They believe targeting conservatives and targeting conservative speech. When I see these witnesses, who, by the way, I'm told will not be the sum total of the witnesses at this first hearing, there will be more. I see people who are very much involved in what, up until this point, has been kind of a right-wing echo chamber here. Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson have conducted their own investigations into the FBI, into their handling of things like Hunter Biden's laptop. Tulsi Gabbard has become a very outspoken figure on right-wing media. She has her own podcast. She's been talking a lot about the so-called Twitter files, the idea of censorship of conservatives. And the last witness, that former FBI special agent, is kind of a newer voice on the right, but again, takes the role of an insider, claiming that the FBI had in some ways bias against conservatives. This stuff has not taken hold in the broader news media. It's not taken hold in the country. The Republicans are hoping to use this committee to inject it into that national narrative.
Garrett Haake, a busy man for the next couple of days there on Capitol Hill. Garrett, thank you as always. Let's talk about what's going down in Ohio, where late today there are dangerous chemicals getting sent into the air on purpose. And if you're like, well, why? Why would they do that? It's because this controlled release is hopefully going to prevent a bigger explosion after this train derailment you're looking at here. This all started Friday in the town of East Palestine, about 50 miles outside Pittsburgh. There's a lot of derailed cars here. Some of them are carrying some dangerous chemicals themselves and getting closer to blowing up. So officials decided today the safest thing to do is to manually release the chemicals, like let them out on purpose, to at least control how fast they come out and where they go. Right? So rather than like a humongous, uncontrolled explosion, try to do this in a way that is somewhat safer. And if you're thinking about neighbors nearby, they all have to be evacuated. Look at this. Police knocking on doors, door to door, making sure people are out. Ohio's governor says this has to happen.
You just need to leave. We're ordering you to leave. This is a matter of life and death.
Let's bring in Ron Allen in Columbiana, Ohio, which is about 10 miles from the derailment. And Ron, for very obvious reasons, we couldn't put you in East Palestine, right? You couldn't actually get there. You have to be at least some distance away because of the fact that there is this sort of dangerous thing that's happening.
Yeah, and I'm just reading because we're getting an update now from the emergency officials saying that this controlled breach, as they're calling it, was completed successfully and that this material is now burning off, consistent with their expectations, and it's going to take a couple of hours more before that's completed and perhaps the resolution of this situation. You're right. This has been going on now for some 72 hours since this train wrecked, and the concern has been 5 cars which contained hundreds of thousands of pounds of a very harmful, carcinogenic chemical that was there and was described as being unstable. And there has been the threat of explosions that officials said could spew shrapnel for miles around this town and a toxic cloud. So what they have done today under a controlled situation is to set off small explosives in the train cars in question. And that's this huge plume of smoke that we're seeing video of now. And they're also trying to leak this material into ditches around the trains where they are going to hopefully try to burn it off. And that's the smoke and any flames that we're going to be seeing in these coming hours is a controlled situation where they have finally said, okay, the situation was unstable. There could have been explosions. So now we're going to try and take care of this ourselves and hopefully do this in a controlled way and release the pressure. And hopefully that will end this crisis that has been going on here now for the past 72 hours. There have been thousands of residents who've been evacuated from their homes. The governor today was adamant when this operation was planned, saying that this was a matter of life and death because now they are purposefully releasing this toxic smoke, these toxic fumes into the air. So they have urged people to get way back, which is why we are many miles back after being about a mile or so earlier today. So there's still a state of emergency in effect. No one has been told that they can go home yet. We'll see how this plays out. But the good news that we're just hearing right now is that this operation so far has been successful, they're saying.
And some incredible real-time information, Ron, coming into us here that's developing just as we are on the air tonight, that this controlled burn is going as they hoped it would. Ron, thank you very much. Appreciate it. A Florida man and a Maryland woman are each making their first court appearances tonight after being charged with planning to attack the power grid in Baltimore. The U.S. attorney there says the suspects, including somebody they describe as a neo-Nazi leader, were working on a plan to shoot at substations in the Baltimore area, with court documents revealing a recorded conversation of one of those people saying if they hit a lot of substations in the same day, it would, you're seeing the quote here, quote, completely destroy this whole city. Officials describing the plot as racially or ethnically motivated. I want to bring in now Laura Jarrett. And Laura, a lot of information seemed to come from an FBI informant who was in touch with these suspects. How did this get figured out? And how soon, like in other words, how close did this come to being far worse if they hadn't caught these folks in time?
That's one of the big questions coming out of today. And what's clear, you can see here, is that federal authorities are describing a plan that really stretched on for months, even dating back to last summer, even though we're just finding out about it now. As you described, this self-avowed neo-Nazi Brandon Russell, someone who had been on the radar of law enforcement for quite a while, someone who had actually just gotten out of prison. He had been previously charged with possessing explosive material. He's now obviously facing a very serious charge, up to 20 years in prison if convicted on this one. And at least as the court the documents describe it, Hallie, it's interesting here. They were talking to this CI unwittingly, describing in vivid detail all the plans, all the things that they wanted to do to specifically target these 5 substations. They described it as if they hit them at the same time, it would be, quote, cascading failure. Take a listen to how the FBI agent described it in greater detail today.
Russell provided instructions and location information. He described attacking the power transformers as the greatest thing somebody can do. In her own words, Clendaniel said she was determined to do this. She added, it would lay this city to waste.
The other big question obviously coming out of today is whether these have been connected to some of the other shootings of power stations we had seen, namely in North Carolina. The FBI agents described there this was not connected to a larger plot, at least as far as we know, but the investigation does continue.
Yeah, but what's interesting here, too, is that both of these suspects have a criminal history. Court documents describe this back and forth between the two of them, or between one of them and then the FBI informant, who apparently tried to convince him to buy her a weapon to carry out this whole thing, saying she'd send them a wish list because she was a convicted felon and couldn't get a weapon or a gun herself.
That's right. She couldn't get the gun. She also describes being under, sort of health conditions, having a kidney disease, and so she thought this was going to make her last and final mark. Obviously, that did not work out that way, and the FBI soon caught up with her. Hallie?
Laura Jarrett, live for us on all of that. Laura, thank you for being on top of it. Appreciate it. Let's take you to South Carolina today, where we're learning that former attorney Alec Murdaugh showed up to his sick mother's house the night of his wife and son's murders in June of 2021. His mom's caregiver says he was there for something like 20 minutes, but later Murdaugh made it a point to remind her he was there that night for double the amount of time. Listen.
He was telling you or saying to you that he was at the house?
Mm-hmm.
When?
The night of the murders.
The night of the murders?
Yes.
What was he telling you about that he was at the house the night of the murders?
That he'd been there 30 to 40 minutes.
The judge also ruling today that prosecutors can use evidence of Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes in this murder trial, considered by some in the South to be the trial of the century there, given the Murdaugh family's deep connection to people in this community. Jurors heard testimony on that for the first time, on alleged crimes ranging from stealing money from clients to insurance fraud. Murdaugh, of course, denies killing his wife and son. Blaine Alexander is just joining us now because court has just wrapped up for the day, Blaine. And what's interesting about that moment that we played, the idea that Murdaugh was trying to, according to the testimony here, tell his sick mother's caregiver he was there for 30 to 40 minutes. It seems like prosecutors are trying to imply that Murdaugh was trying to plant an alibi for where he was.
Yes. Absolutely. In fact, she testified that she was so upset by that conversation she had with Murdaugh that she later called her brother, who's a police officer, because she said it really just upset her. You know, a lot of the compelling moments from today's trial came during that testimony from Shelley Smith. She was also questioned about something that she saw Murdaugh carrying in several days after the murders. She says that it was a blue tarp. Now, that's notable because the prosecution is making the case that some weeks after the murders, investigators went into his mother's home and found a very large blue rain jacket that had gunshot residue on it. So that certainly got a lot of back and forth. She also gave some details about the night, says that Murdaugh came to the house, described what he was wearing, and also said that he seemed fidgety. Hallie.
The prosecution got a big win today, Blaine, because the judge is going to let evidence of Murdaugh's alleged financial crimes be heard in front of the jury here. We have talked about this before, but Murdaugh, in addition to the murders of his wife and son that he denies, right, he says he's innocent, he faces like a bunch of other charges, like dozens of other charges, and some of them around some of these alleged financial crimes. The prosecution was trying to use that and hopes to use that as showing some motive here. So the fact that a judge is going to let them talk about it is wind in the sails for the prosecution and potentially another big hurdle for the defense.
It is major for the prosecution. In fact, that was something that they had really been trying to get. All of those big details that we talked about throughout last week, Hallie, now the jury is going to be able to hear them, and that is certainly crucial when it comes to the prosecution's case. Now, as for the defense, the judge did put some parameters around that and said, you can consider this information, but only to a point. Listen to what the judge said.
You may not consider this evidence for purposes of character of Mr. Murdaugh, nor may you consider this evidence as evidence of his propensity to commit other crimes.
Now, Hallie, remember, the prosecution is trying to lay out the case that essentially Murdaugh was in such financial distress that he was in some way trying to distract from those other crimes that he was being accused of, that he was desperate, and that is what the prosecution says led him to those murders, which, of course, he's denying, Hallie.
Blaine Alexander, thank you so much for being on top of it. Appreciate it. Coming up, Florida lawmakers are getting ready to strip Disney World of its special tax status, which could mean a big difference for the so-called happiest place on earth. We'll tell you whether they think they're going to stay happy or what. Plus, the Premier League's reigning champ could soon get kicked out of the league. We'll explain what's going on with Man City in the 5 Things. breaking news out of California late tonight. New video released in connection with the deadly police shooting of a 36-year-old wheelchair-bound double amputee. We're talking about this man, Anthony Lowe, shot multiple times by Huntington Park police. There's some new security footage. You're looking at it here from a nearby gas station, showing what happened right before police got there. Officers say Lowe stabbed somebody with a 12-inch butcher knife. It's tough to see in this shot, but that's what it shows in the incident, in the moments before that. Now, Hallie Charles is joining us now, and that is not the only new piece of video that we got today. No body cam video, right, but a different angle of this police encounter with Lowe. Tell us about it.
Right, no body cam here for Huntington Park Police, but Hallie, after more than a week since the shooting now, Huntington Park Police just released footage of the shooting taken from a nearby business, presenting a fuller picture of what happened. That new footage shows the key moment Anthony Lowe, a double amputee and stabbing suspect, was killed. In it, you see officers approach Lowe and pull the wheelchair out from under him. He appears to move away from officers, then faces them, appearing to swing the knife twice before officers fatally shoot him. That part where Lowe faces officers is not visible in the social media video shared last week that sparked nationwide outrage. Officers say leading up to the shooting, they deployed 2 separate tasers twice in an attempt to stop him, but the tasers were ineffective. Based on that video from the social media posters, protesters said he didn't appear to be an immediate threat because they say it appeared he was moving away from officers. Hallie?
What else do we know about the actual incident, the stabbing here, the person who was stabbed in this thing?
Yeah, Hallie, police also released video of the stabbing that spurred all of this. It shows Lowe minutes before his confrontation with police stabbed someone on the sidewalk while out of his wheelchair. At last check, police say that stabbing victim is in stable condition. That victim, a 46-year-old man, did an interview with Good Day LA. He says there he didn't know Lowe. Take a listen.
Seeing that blood gushing out from here. Yes, I did. I thought it was a goner right there. Just walking down the street, coming from looking for a job to try to survive and put money in my plate and provide for my family and get struck by a knife and almost lose my life.
He says he got surgery after puncturing his lung from that stabbing. Hallie?
If we pull back a little bit here, right, this is a police shooting that has triggered truly like a national outcry against the use of police force against somebody with a disability here. Obviously, the police have their perspective on this. What about the family here? How have they responded?
Well, since seeing the latest video from police, attorneys for the family still say the shooting wasn't justified, saying Lowe was hobbling away from officers and suffering a mental health crisis. His mother also said that she still does not understand why Lowe was shot, especially, she says, so many times. Take a listen to what his attorneys have to say.
There was absolutely no reason to shoot a double amputee in the back 11 times who was hobbling away from officers. He was a handicapped person suffering from a mental crisis.
Even since seeing this new police footage today, Lowe's mother says she wants the officers fired. The Huntington Park police chief says an investigation by a different law enforcement agency will determine if officers' actions were justified, and the district attorney will determine here if criminal charges come out of this. Hallie?
Nyala Charles live for us there in L.A. Nyala, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Dell planning to lay off like 6,600 employees, about 5% of its workforce, becoming just the latest tech company to announce cuts. One executive told employees in a memo that they were doing this to try to stay ahead of what they described as downturn impacts, a.k.a. in plain English, that probably means the possibility of a recession. Number 2, the FDA says a food manufacturer is recalling hundreds of snacks and ready-made meals over concerns about listeria. This is stuff sold in vending machines and some stores in states along the eastern U.S. It's a Baltimore-based company called Fresh Ideation Food Group that did not immediately return a request for comment today. No illnesses, luckily, have been reported. Number 3, Manchester City, that big British soccer team, is being accused of breaking a ton of financial rules by the English Premier League. An independent commission will take a look, and depending what it finds, it means Man City could get huge penalties or maybe even expulsion. Remember, they're the league's reigning champions. The team says it was surprised by the allegations. They've said they've done nothing wrong. Number 4, speaking of people who are good in their preferred sport, how about Kyrie Irving, the Brooklyn Nets superstar, reportedly getting traded to the Mavs in Dallas. Irving's been pretty controversial, especially after he tweeted out a poster of a deeply anti-Semitic film last October. He also missed like half of last season for refusing the COVID vaccine. Number 5, the Powerball jackpot keeps getting bigger, up to at least $747 million ahead of tonight's drawing, one of the biggest jackpot totals in lottery history. Let's take it to Florida now, where lawmakers plan to vote this week in a rare February session to maybe reverse a decision to get rid of a special tax zone for Walt Disney World. Here's the deal, right? Right now, this special tax status for Disney is supposed to end in June. But this new bill would keep it going as a quote-unquote oversight district managed by 5 people handpicked by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. What does this all stem from, right? Remember when DeSantis pushed the state's legislature to end Disney's special status? That's because the company criticized Florida's controversial Don't Say Gay law after it was passed. Sam Brock is in Miami live for us now. And you know, what is happening here? In other words, like there are, I think, some critics of DeSantis who see this as a kind of revenge move. Like DeSantis backs this law that critics saw as discriminatory to the LGBTQ+ community. Disney comes out and is like, we're not cool with this. So DeSantis comes out and says, fine, like all your tax breaks, they're gone. Where are we with this now?
Okay, so what is going on here, both conceptually in terms of DeSantis' fight with Disney and then also the actual Reedy Creek Improvement District itself? Those are 2 separate questions, and they're both interesting. Let's start with the actual district, Hallie. You mentioned this a second ago, the fact that the legislature here in Florida acted very quickly to dissolve it altogether, really within a couple of weeks of this law getting passed. The problem is they had to kind of put the thing in reverse and go back, beep, 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 because of the fact that there's this bond money, about $1 billion worth, that according to the original law in 1967 that brought Disney to Central Florida in the first place says if you're going to dissolve this district, you got to address the debt. And there was no plan for the debt. So now they're coming back with a state-run board, Hallie. At least that's what we think is going to be the structure and the conception of this that would allow, theoretically, Florida to put the debt not on the taxpayers who live nearby, but on Disney itself. But you would have to expect, even though we haven't heard much from Disney, that the company is not going to be okay with that or go down without a legal fight. So that's the logistics. In terms of the conceptual right now, Governor Ron DeSantis has sort of been the standard bearer for the Conservative Party when it comes to pushing back against wokeness, in his words. And we've seen this bleed into so many aspects of culture here in Florida, whether it is, in his words, shoehorning queer theory into AP African American studies, or it's banning certain books that parents don't want their children to be exposed to, and of course the Don't Say Gay or parental rights in education law. All these things sort of factor into the same vein, and Governor DeSantis has been incredibly successful and popular here and nationally in Republican circles in taking these issues on head-on, directly.
Let me pick up on that, right, Sam, because you know well the way that the sort of Florida political sphere works. Governor DeSantis has really made some of these culture war fights the centerpiece of at least his national profile here, as he is widely speculated to be considering a run for president. But this Disney fight, like, and you've kind of laid out maybe the risk-benefit analysis to some degree. Taxpayers on the one hand, it could alienate. Big dollar donors on the other hand, it could alienate, right?
Yeah, big dollar donors for sure. So look, there's this strange sort of dichotomy that's going on right now. It does appeal to his base. And by the way, Governor DeSantis broke fundraising records in Florida after he pushed back against Disney. So it has been a winning issue for him and for some donors. But when you look at some of his most high-profile backers, Ken Griffin, for example, who's one of the biggest Ron DeSantis supporters you will find in the country. He's a multi-billion-dollar donor, arguably the most influential one in the party. He's come out and said, I fully support DeSantis when it comes to opposing what's going on with kids being exposed to conversations over sexual orientation or gender identity. I back that. But once you take on Disney and try to take away their tax status, it's almost like he's saying that is a third rail that you don't violate. And so to hear a DeSantis supporter come out, this was about a year ago, and say, don't do that, that's where we draw the line. It's fascinating to see how this will affect Republican politics and certainly DeSantis' campaign moving forward.
Sam Brock, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. When we come back, a lot of schools and colleges are blocking ChatGPT, that like AI thing where you can put something in and it spits out like a paper or an essay or whatever. But some teachers now, instead of trying to push back against it, are just leaning into it, trying to make it work for them. We're going to have a live example of how this plays out and what it means for the future of school next. So So for this next story we're telling you about, the introduction did not come from a human. In other words, a person did not write what I'm about to say. AI did. We entered a command into an AI chatbot. We said, write a short TV news introduction to a story about college students using ChatGPT to write papers. Here is what ChatGPT came up with. I'm just going to quote the software says. In the world of higher education, technology is changing the way students approach their studies. But a new trend has emerged on college campuses. Students are turning to AI language models like OpenAI's ChatGPT to write their papers. In this exclusive report, we'll take a closer look at this growing trend, its benefits and concerns, and what it means for the future of education. So stay tuned as we explore the impact of ChatGPT on college students and the world of academia. That's what the AI came up with. Like a little cheesy, a little like news speak, but overall not terrible, right? And that is why some educators are now leaning into the tech rather than trying to fight against it. Our Jake Ward is joining us now with more on that. It is a new frontier, Jake. Like the AI just wrote an intro that is, if not great, at least passable in the television news industry, right? Like, and there's a whole generation of kids, students who are coming up with this that are in middle school, high school, et cetera, that have this at their fingertips.
That's right. I mean, Hallie, at this point, the estimate is that anywhere from a third to maybe half of college-age students have already used ChatGPT to finish an assignment for them. We talked to professors and teachers across the country who say that whenever they have encountered a student using ChatGPT, they basically flunk them right away. Well, we also spoke to a teacher in rural Oregon and who's trying to sort of use this as not just something that needs to be banned, but as a teaching tool. I asked her what it was like when she first encountered it. Here's how she described it.
My first reaction was absolutely panic. I thought this is going to make me obsolete if it does what these people are saying it's going to do. It instantly created a fear in me that I thought, I am uncomfortable living in this fear, so I'm going to go tackle it.
Now, here's what's so creative and cool about that teacher and her students. What they're basically doing is they're taking a book that they have read, asking ChatGPT to write something about that book, and then critiquing the results. So trying to figure out, is there cliched language or is some of this untrue, like sort of using it to kind of test out a student's command of the book. Here's the problem, of course, right? Like that AI written introduction that you read on air a moment ago, right? Like on the one hand, you and I look at that and we think, oh my God, it's the end of the world. On the other hand, there's company after company out there that looks at that and says, that's a great market opportunity. Let's build that right away.
Signs,
and
yes.
That, of course, is the problem. Exactly.
No, you're right. I do love the sort of the classroom, as you say, the very bright students, the very bright teacher you spoke with, because it's like, take it and make it work to your advantage, right? Like rather than push against it, see if you can lean into it and make it work for you. But it does get kind of meta because certainly the students could put in to the AI, write a critique of a chatbot generated essay on a paper. You know what I mean? Like it's layers on layers on layers with this, and that's what's so complicated here.
That's absolutely right. And this is why, of course, we're seeing everybody, not just teachers, but racing to try to catch up with this. Just today, Google announced its answer to ChatGPT, it seems like it, called Bard, like Shakespeare, that's going to be integrated into its search product, which is, as you know, the center of how that company makes money.
What does that mean?
So, you know, I mean, this is exactly, what does that mean? How do they make money off of it? You can just imagine the kind of like redlining, white-knuckled, highly caffeinated meetings that drove them to make this kind of change. Everyone is scrambling to catch up with this stuff right now and how it's going to change education and business and the future. All of that is happening literally before our eyes, Hallie.
But there's also new technology that tries to fight the new technology by saying, no, this was created by new technology, like AI detecting bots themselves.
That's right. We actually also spent time with companies that have in the past been used to detect plagiarism. They're trying very rapidly to catch up with ChatGPT because that evades some of the stuff. But it's important to understand, right? Companies are going to build money-making machines on top of this stuff, and there's no regulation around it yet. So all of that has yet to be determined there, Hallie.
Jake Ward, it is a fascinating look at all of this. I'm excited to watch more of it tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. You can see Jake's reporting there, 6:30 Eastern, however you watch your local NBC station. Our thanks to Jake for that. Still to come here on the show. Do you know somebody who still is struggling with the loss of smell because of COVID or long COVID or whatever? Well, guess what? What you're looking at might actually help them. It could change their life. We've got that in the original. Plus, the rather alarming flyers being found across neighborhoods in Atlanta. We'll explain in a second. To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. Did you know that today marks 3 years since the first confirmed COVID death in this country? 3 years since that happened. And we know that one of the lasting effects for people who have had COVID, at least the initial COVID strain, is a loss of a sense of smell, taste and smell. One study says that 5.5% of people who had COVID have problems with this. That's actually millions of people. But 2 researchers may have an unusual and creative solution. Dr. Akshay Syal has more.
Craig Jerome, a nurse practitioner in North Carolina, lost his sense of smell after he got COVID 2 years ago.
In the initial onset, you had the overwhelming sensation of, I've lost it, and when is it coming back? You know, unfortunately, it's never came back to me the way it used to be.
Today, he still can't smell properly.
How has your life been affected personally as a result of not being able to smell as well?
I think just looking at it and going, you know, what did I enjoy and what do I miss? I think it's a grief moment in a sense that, you know, you go through it and you long to be the way you were.
Jerome is one of more than 15 million estimated adults worldwide suffering from long-term loss of smell due to COVID, according to research published by medical journal The BMJ last July. But 2 scientists at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Medicine might have a solution. They're developing a bionic nose.
The whole idea is that for individuals who have lost their sense of smell, if you can bypass the damaged area of the system, you can restore the sense of smell.
Dr. Richard Costanza and Dr. Daniel Coelho are developing the new medical technology. Here's how it works. A small sensor that can detect smells is placed on something like a pair of glasses. That sensor would then send signals to a chip implanted in the brain. The chip then stimulates parts of the brain that process smells.
Series of sensors that detect smell molecules, and each smell is going to have a different pattern. Depending on that pattern, a different way of stimulating the brain is done, and the end result is that the patient can appreciate different smells.
An early prototype showed promising results. Researchers identified electrical patterns in the brains of rats, suggesting they were processing smells. These doctors have been working on this problem long before COVID started.
When you've been working in the field for 30, 40 years and struggling to find solutions that can be translated to clinical trials, it's very rewarding to be at this point in time.
They say it will take 5 to 10 years for a prototype to be ready. But for those who can't smell, the device would change lives. After all, being able to smell can save your life. Think about a gas leak or a fire, and smelling something like homemade cookies can bring joy.
The sense of smell is very closely linked to memory, to mood, to cognition. More than almost any other sense, you can smell something and instantly be transported back 40 years to a memory that you hadn't thought about.
And for Jerome, even the simplest joys of life, without smell, have lost their luster.
And you hug someone that you love and you haven't been around in a while, and you can't get that full experience of, you know, wrapping your arms around them and smelling that essence that they have, and it's theirs to their own degree. You just can't get that like you used to. So that embrace and that reminder is not there.
For those who've lost their sense of smell, the bionic nose can't come soon enough.
It is so interesting to look at, Dr. Syal, and it's so interesting that it is a bionic nose in the sort of technical sense of it. It's not a prosthetic device, if you will. You talked about the timeline that it could take up to a decade. There are people who want it now, right? I mean, there are people who still do not have their sense of smell after COVID who would love to see something like this much, much sooner.
Yeah, you know, the good news is most people who lose their sense of smell from COVID actually get it back within 2 years. I myself lost my sense of smell when I had it, and I was putting on soap in the shower and I couldn't even smell it. But I don't want to trivialize this. I think when we talk about losing the sense of smell, people may think it's not that big of a deal, but it really can affect your emotional well-being.
Dr. Akshay Syal, thank you so much. You're totally right. You're totally right. One of these issues is that people often think that it's not a big thing, but in reality, it does affect how they experience, for example, food or the environment or the area around them. Thank you so much. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southern Bureau, the governor of Georgia says police are investigating after people found anti-Semitic flyers in their neighborhoods. One state House rep says she got them and that it's been happening to a lot of Jewish families. In a statement, Governor Brian Kemp says this kind of hate has no place in that state. From our Northeast Bureau today, Buffalo, New York, got hit by the biggest earthquake it's seen in something like 40 years. Listen for a sec. That is startling for sure. May have scared the pets, but luckily really not much damage from this thing. Officials say, yeah, you'll probably feel some aftershocks, but even the ones you do feel might be too weak to even notice. From our West Coast Bureau, the Chiefs and the Eagles have officially touched down in Phoenix ahead of the Super Bowl. And while they're getting ready for the big game, you see police also investigating a major theft. They say something like $100,000 worth of stuff was stolen from a vendor working nearby at the NFL's Super Bowl experience. It's not clear what was stolen. Police say it was production property. Still, not something you want to see just a few days before the Super Bowl. Of course, a lot of people on the lookout for another theft on Sunday when the Philadelphia Eagles steal the hopes and dreams of Chiefs fans. Coming up. Beyonce fans kind of nervous today. Tickets for her first tour in years are on sale, not too long after that whole Ticketmaster Taylor Swift debacle. So how is the company looking to avoid a second meltdown? And how'd the pre-sale go today? We've got that. We're getting into it in a sec. Breaking news here on the show. The pre-sale tickets for Beyonce's tour have opened up just in the last couple of hours. This is the news you can use, folks, and we cover it all because, listen, there is like real news to this. This is a humongous test for Ticketmaster. You know about the whole Taylor Swift ticketing debacle a couple of months ago. Ticketmaster crashed because so many people wanted those pre-sale tickets. They ended up having to cancel general sales altogether. Ticketmaster was tweeting today about the Beyonce thing, with everybody hoping to avoid a repeat, that pre-sale registration demand was 8 times more than ticket inventory. They say there's definitely not going to be enough tickets to go around, but you still have somewhat of a shot. Savannah Sellers is joining us now. Ton of demand for this, Savannah. First of all, the tickets have been on sale for a little bit. I'm not even trying to get tickets because I understand the limitations of my own abilities and patience. How is it going? Like, any meltdowns yet, or so far so good?
Yeah, so see, the thing for me is I'm still like emotionally distressed from the Taylor Swift sale. So it's just, I can't even add this to the list now. Absolutely. But actually, so pre-sale seems to be going pretty well. But what you just pointed out is really important. The demand was so high, so many fans were waitlisted for the pre-sale. That's really where the heartbreak hit. Yesterday, fans found out that they weren't going to get this code that then was going to let them get into line today. Now, throughout the day, they actually did start moving people off of the wait list, which fans were obviously thrilled about. They'd get a text throughout the day that said, hey, actually, you can go in. Here's a code. Go check it out. They did that for thousands of fans across multiple venues. But for the people that did actually get the codes and got in there, it seems to really have been smooth and certainly comparatively smooth when you talk about the Taylor Swift sale. I talked to people who said it was so smooth, the whole process was 10 minutes. I was in line only for a few minutes. I skipped up. There's that little bar people have probably seen all the memes of online. They said I was like 400 in line, then 20, and then 1. I was in. I even had options, Hallie. They said it was actually pretty much a comfortable experience.
So what changed? In other words, like, what did Ticketmaster do differently this time, and is it something that's going to be durable?
Yeah, so the big thing was that they phased the rollout here. In the Taylor Swift debacle, all the tickets went on sale the same day for all different venues. Here, they've grouped them. There's 3 different groups. This was just the Queen Bee. That means her Beehive group, her fan club's pre-sale was all that took place today for what's called Group A. There's about 10 cities in that list. Then there's Group B. There's Group C. They'll do this all over again. But yes, that phased rollout does seem like something that could carry on to other big music icons and potentially make this smoother. And then again, it's really about those people getting waitlisted beforehand, which, you know, that hurts when that happens, but at least it wasn't a mess getting in the line.
Well, Ticketmaster is sure hoping that things stay smooth sailing on this one. Just from a business perspective, they're going to want to make sure that that is the case. Savannah Sellers, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. That does it for us this hour. And again, we are barreling towards the State of the Union tomorrow night here on NBC News Now. I will be joined by my friend and colleague Tom Yamas right here in Washington. You're going to see a preview just before 8 Eastern. And we got a lot of bells and whistles for you. Lester Holt, Savannah Guthrie are going to be there for the network special coverage starting at 9 on your local NBC News station. And then Kristen Welker and Chuck Todd pick it up afterwards. It is like this is our Super Bowl. So we're doing it. Wear your Eagles green and come join us for State of the Union. More tomorrow, same time, same place. We'll see you then.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.